Okay, this is a screencast for ethnicity and crime. What we're going to look at in this screencast is the statistics surrounding ethnicity and crime. Also ethnicities as victims, different ethnic groups as the victims of crime, the role that the criminal justice system play in all of this, and as ever backing this up with some sociological theory. Okay, some little bit of information on statistics. Basically, as you can see, there's a massive difference between the total overall population of 10-year-olds and over between white and every other ethnic group in Britain. However, if we look at the statistics in terms of things like stop and search, the disparity between the overall population, how many of that population are being stops and searches, is a lot higher. So some key stats that we can pull from this is that you are 2 times more likely to be arrested and convicted if you are black than you are if you are white, and also you're nearly 3 times more likely to go to prison if you are black compared to white. So what these statistics actually suggest is that ethnic minority groups are more likely to be criminal. The problem with this, as we know when we've looked at official statistics in education and other kind of things, is actually we can question official crime statistics, because all this is telling us really is how many reported convictions, stop and searches and sentences have actually been indicated. So it doesn't necessarily tell us the dark figure, and it doesn't actually tell us why these statistics actually exist. And this is what we tried to do within this PowerPoint. So if we can't really trust official crime statistics, sociologists need to find out still exactly how crime is happening and why crime is happening. And they use things such as self-report studies, which are distributed to criminals and also victims of crime to report on why they committed a crime, etc., etc. This gives a lot more qualitative data rather than just the quantitative numbers that we get from official statistics. In terms of committing offences, how we can look at this today is seeing that clearly white is higher than any other ethnic group in terms of any offence. The only time that white are not higher than anything else is in terms of the serious offences, which are mixed race ethnic group, which are committing more serious crimes. If we look at black, we can see that they are quite significantly lower than white in any type of offence, but maybe not so much in terms of serious offences. What's interesting out of all of this in the 2003 self-report study that we're looking at here is that the only category where black people were actually higher in the type of crime was robbery, which is interesting on 2 counts. One, that it shows that majority of crimes committed are by white people, but also the fact that the type of crime that black people are committing is utilitarian crime, which you could use from a Marxist perspective, or even, I suppose, Cohen and Merton in terms of strain, that they are committing crimes which are working class crimes because of the problems and boundaries that are put in their way. You could bring in labelling as well, and the idea that people are negatively labelled in education, for instance, and this stops them from legitimately achieving the goals of society. The other thing that's interesting about this is if white people are committing more crimes and black people particularly are committing less crimes, then why is this idea that black crime is higher? And these self-report studies kind of tell us that it's false. The stats don't prove. So the question is, why is there enhanced police presence in areas where there is high numbers of ethnic minority groups, particularly black people, when they aren't the ones who are committing the crime in the first place? In addition to statistics showing that it's not necessarily black people who are committing the most amount of crime, it's also interesting to see that the crime survey in 2012-2013 showed that non-white groups were more likely to be the victim of crime. Obviously reports in newspapers and things like that tend to make out that it is black people committing crime, and that it is white people who are probably the victims of this, but this isn't necessarily the case. The survey also shows that victims of murder are much higher in black and Asian groups, and also there's a massive difference between the actual official reporting of racially motivated incidents compared to the crime survey for England and Wales, which looks more at higher levels, unreported as well, potentially, but these are just the recorded, but unreported racial motivated incidents are much higher than we're seeing in official crime statistics. So this again leads us on to thinking, how much can we trust official crime statistics when it comes to both being the criminal but also the victims of crime. Previously we asked the question about, well, why do police focus so much on ethnic minority groups when it comes to various aspects of crime? Well, if we're looking at the role of the criminal justice system, which includes police, the courts and stuff like that, then some of the reasons put forward by sociologists are that there's a big problem with the relationship between police and ethnic minority groups. The Stephen Lawrence case in the 1990s, Macpherson carried out a bit of research into the Metropolitan Police and found that there was a lot of institutional racism in the police force at the time. And one of the reasons why the Stephen Lawrence case went on so long, and also the fact that these people weren't prosecuted at first and a lot of the cases were thrown out, is because they didn't believe that these white people were capable of committing this crime against a black lad, and also the fact that this black lad probably deserved it and he was up to no good. One of the other issues with this is that there was only 4% of ethnic minority police officers in the police force, so this means that ethnic minority groups can't actually relate to the police because they don't believe that there's anyone there who's representing them. So if you are a black youth and you are living in an area of deprivation, for instance, and you have police officers constantly on your case and they just happen to be white, then this creates a bit of a problem. It might be, the idea that you think they are being racist. It might not be, but I think one of the issues is that if you've got someone who's from the same ethnic minority group as you, then you are more likely to listen to them, understand them, because you know that they understand you. BBC carried out a couple of bits of undercover research as well, called The Secret Policeman, which you can easily access on YouTube, etc. In 2003 and 2008, and found that there was a lot of what's called canteen culture, and this is the idea that of racist language used, and the idea that there's an expectation that black people are going to be the ones committing the crime and things like that. Other things that we've already looked at is the likelihood of stop and search is a lot higher if you are ethnic minority group. Arrests are more likely to be made as well because of this, and also if you are ethnic minority, particularly black youth male, then you are more likely to be sentenced for a crime compared to if you are a white person. And some research into this, Phillips and Bowling believe that racism does play a major part in the criminal justice system, but it's not just this, there's other factors as well, such as unemployment in the area. If you are unemployed, you've got more chance of being on the streets during the day, up to no good, maybe committing crime. But also, if you're not on a job, then you've got more chance to commit a crime. So it's not just racism, but it's other factors as well. So if we look at the theory behind this, the main three arguments are the idea of the structure of society. Left realist view is the thing that's causing ethnic differences in crime. Also the idea of about crime being socially constructed, and this comes from a NEO-MARXIST perspective, as well as finally the cultural perspective. Okay, so if we look at the left realist perspective, Lee and Young in their investigations from the 70s onwards say that the statistics are real and they do reflect a difference in the level of offending. So this idea that, okay, black people are committing less crime, they believe actually no, black people are committing the levels of crime they are, but the problem is it's society, it's the structure of society which is forcing them into it. So for instance, racism, marginalisation and relative deprivation. Key here is the relative deprivation, the idea about how deprived we are compared to what we believe we should be doing. The marginalisation thing obviously links in with the police that we've just talked about, and also the political parties on there to represent this underclass as such, and also just wider racism in society, within education and within the police. So what Lee and Young believe happens as a result of this is the emergence of subcultures through youth trying to find people who have similar ideas because they are marginalised from wider society, and also people who have similar ideas about deprivation and also racism. You've got someone to kind of back you up. This links in with the ideas of Cohen and Murray. that we can't achieve our goals legitimately, and also that we want to try and gain status in some other way. However, criticisms of this is that statistics aren't necessarily down to just racism. So an example of that would be that Asian groups, for instance, suffer racism. If anything, since 9/11, etc., Islamophobia probably face more racism than any other ethnic group. However, they are, as we've seen in the statistics earlier, very, very low level offenders. Also, in terms of the type of crime, street crime differences aren't just down to racial differences. So Marxists would argue that actually this is down to deprivation and a capitalist society, and it's not actually down to the colour of your skin or your ethnicity. Which links in with what Paul Gilroy is talking about in this myth of black criminality. Actually, it's not down to relative deprivation, why people are committing crime, or why black people might be committing crime, but it's a historical racism within society, and that police public stereotyping have always labelled black people as such a minority group. This goes back historically to the days of slavery, to the years when Afro-Caribbean people from Pakistan and India came over after the Second World War to help rebuild Britain. However, the problem with this is that it doesn't help explain interracial crimes, so crimes committed within the same race. Also, these colonial struggles that we talk about are really outdated. Can we really say that this is still a reason? And that there's evidence to suggest that it's not actually black people are more criminal than white people, and we've seen these statistics at the start of this, which suggest actually, it's not black people who are committing as much crime as white, it's the other way around. So to say that the reason why black criminality is so high is because of these racist perspectives, then it's a little bit unfounded, really. The neo-Marxist view really looks at the idea of policing and how policing is the problem in terms of causing the figures and the amounts of ethnic minority crimes. Hall et al. Carried out some research in the 1970s, and this was this idea that there was a crisis of capitalism, the idea that people didn't have a lot of money, there was high unemployment, so there was this supposed rise in mugging. Now what the media did was really get a hold of this, and moral entrepreneurs were able to use this effectively to ensure that they could increase the police presence by blaming youths for these muggings. The media really made scapegoats of black youths for these muggings, even though it wasn't necessarily as big a thing. So again, deviant amplification in this. And what Hall et al., neo-Marxists, and also the labelling theorists believe is that this is down to the idea of stereotyping, and it's easier to stereotype black people as criminal than it is any other kind of ethnic minority group or even any other social class. So what Hall et al. Are really saying is that actually it's the police procedures which are to blame for the high levels of ethnic crime, rather than them actually being deviant in itself. Police are creating this problem. And what Marxists, particularly neo-Marxists, believe is that it's the power of the ruling classes using force and justifying the means through things such as scapegoating black people and getting away with it and getting the backing of the public by putting in the media and creating a deviance amplification that it's a bigger problem than it actually is, and causing this thing called a moral panic. So evaluating everything that we've really looked at, some of the issues are with Hall et al. That we've just looked at is that they actually fail to look at the real reasons for crime happening in the first place. So yes, there was black youths mugging people on the street, or even if there was white youths mugging people on the street, they don't actually explain why that was happening in the first place. All they're really looking at is the idea that the media and the police blow things out of proportion. Also, when the crisis of capitalism ended, so if you think about the 1990s when it was a very affluent and prosperous time, it didn't actually change the relationship between black youth and criminality. The stats and the figures didn't change that much. So to actually blame it on the idea that we were more deprived during this period, and that is why we had such high criminality, well actually it's still happening anyway. Some of the positives about this is that there are very similar views in recent media, such as the banking crisis. So the idea that because of the banking crisis, criminality has risen because of a result of this, because people were deprived and didn't have as much money. If we also think about the recent problems in terms of immigration and the rise in racially aggravated crimes against ethnic minority groups, again, the studies that we've looked at today and also the facts and figures kind of back up this idea that within society, but we can link it with Hall et al. In terms of the moral panic. We think about the Daily Mail and we think about other newspapers and other publications scaremongering people into thinking, these foreign people are coming over here to take our jobs or to do really bad things. So we've recently had a case in Newcastle where there was 3 Syrians who were accused of sexually assaulting a young girl in Newcastle, and actually were found not guilty of it. But if you read the newspapers that were in the lead up to that, then they were basically painted as criminal beforehand. So, the idea of moral panics and stereotyping of people definitely does play into the ideas that we've seen in today's video. We previously looked at the idea that perhaps actually we can't necessarily blame racism. So Palmer puts forward the idea that Asian groups experience high levels of racism, but they are less likely to be convicted of offences. So the idea that you are kicking against the system that was maybe put forward by Gilroy doesn't really hold true according to Palmer. So the reasons for this, that Palmer believes that maybe they aren't convicted of as many offences, is because they're not reacting to this racism in the same way. This could be down to the fact that they have a better family life and a better culture. They've got a support network because they are more likely to be in a nuclear family, they're more likely to have fathers, whereas if we look at the black ethnic minority groups, then a lot of them come from single parent families, lack of fathers, lack of authority, lack of a role model, and they look for that elsewhere. Problem with this is that we can't just blame it just on this family life. For instance, Pitt found that there's a big increase in single-parent Asian families in Britain at the moment, so we can't say it's down to not having a father, because actually those groups that are still quite low compared to other ethnic minority groups are experiencing the same problems, which we're saying is one of the reasons for black people committing so many crimes. Important to link here when we're thinking about synoptic is this link to education, and we can link this to the idea about deprivation, but also the way that Asian people deal with institutional racism compared to black children and how they've got that support culture behind. Thank you very much for listening. See you later. Bye bye.